Welcome to My Business Matters, the Michigan Chamber podcast.
Hello, I'm Becky Burtka, VP of Member Engagement for the Michigan Chamber and today's podcast host. I'm really excited about our today's topics, especially just after wrapping up our last Michigan Athena event for the year, where we were diving into the very issue of courage and what that means for women in leadership. I also want to say a special hello to any of our Michigan Athena members that are tuning in today. So a big welcome to a couple of special leaders who have forged their very unique paths in today's world. We have Shaquila Myers. She's the chief of staff to Michigan House Speaker Joe Tate, shepherding public policy issues for one of the top elected officials in the state. And we also have Tiffany Dowling, president and CEO of M3 Group, a full-service marketing agency where she started more than 20 years ago and publisher of the 517 magazine. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Becky.
We have a lot to go over and a great big topic here. So let's get started, probably just with some background from both of you and what you do. So, give us a little bit, tell us about yourselves, what you do every day. Shaquila, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Sure. As you said in my introduction, I'm Chief of Staff to Speaker Tate. Previously worked in the Whitmer administration, and before that, I spent a decade with the Michigan Senate Democrats. I've done a little bit of everything from policy to run campaigns, and kind of run the gamut. Most recently, I did economic development policy for Governor Whitmer before coming over to the House. So my day today is no 2 days are alike. As chief of staff, you are essentially the proxy for the speaker, and I run everything from the HR side of things to, the partisan, the nonpartisan policy, floor operations, all of that, including thinking about budgeting and health plans. We bought a parking lot last year, of all things. So we finally own Roosevelt.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And so it's kind of there's no 2 days alike. Today I spent a fair amount of time thinking about the last quarter of this year and kind of doing some planning for next year. Even though it's an election year, you have to plan either way, as you do with any leadership company. You gotta think about growth. You gotta think about direction and staffing, and are you meeting needs, and then what changes you need to make. I mean, largely, I'm very focused on the next 6 months, and I think of things in quarters. Again, I think something that some of my friends in business have taught me. So that's, I am always thinking like 1 to 2 quarters ahead so that we can be as productive as possible.
Awesome. And, leader of the biggest caucus in the legislature. So it's a big task aside from all of those HR and strategy and all of those, forward-thinking operations. Yeah. Tiffany,
well, that was exhausting. Wow. So very similarly, I run a business that has, 35 people. So full service marketing, advertising, public relations. We also have a magazine that we put out monthly. So, my role on any given day is to really manage, the people. What are they doing? How are they doing it? Really looking at, what clients have going on. Really at my core, I'm a problem solver. So I like to see what's happening and see how I can help make things more efficient, more effective. I also work on the budgets and look at projections and make sure that, everything is running as smoothly as possible. I also embark on large projects. Like, we recently went through an acquisition of another agency in the Detroit market. So I spend a great deal of time working on things like that. So I am also never doing the same thing twice, which I really love.
That's awesome. And I do think as leaders, you have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades and be willing to put yourself out there. And isn't that courage and why we're here to talk today?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So Shaquila, I know you're in a highly challenging, fast-paced role for the, one of the state's top elected officials. Is that something that you saw as your path and worked toward early? Or how did you get here? how are we here right now?
It absolutely was not the plan. My bachelor's degree is in health science. I have a minor in exercise science. I thought I'd be a physical therapist, maybe running my own clinic right now. I'm a little ways away from that. While I was in grad school, I got a master's in public administration, and I focused on nonprofit management. I worked for several nonprofits and really got bit by the political bug. And I thought I'd try it out for a few years, and maybe, I'd come up to Lansing or go to DC, and I'd try it out. And then eventually, I started in politics when Detroit was in its most tumultuous state, right? I'm a Detroiter, and I've adopted Lansing as my home, but I really thought I'd go back and either work in the political world in Detroit or work in the nonprofit world in Detroit. And I really found my place, right? I started in policy, and I was hired to do families policy because I came from a domestic violence agency, and I had done a lot of work with custodial and non-custodial parents and then survivors of domestic violence. And I was hired to do that type of work in the DHHS budget. And life happens, and there were changes on staff in between the time when I was hired and when I started. And so I pretty much got the leftovers of what nobody wanted. So I did transportation policy, I did local government, I did capital outlay. So I got, which is honestly how we met, Becky. You were working for the appropriations chair at the time. But I kind of found my niche, and I just kept working towards it. I kept building a skill set. Because I didn't have a plan to work in politics, I really had to find my way. And, you got questions later here, so I don't want to get into it, but I kind of collected mentors who helped guide the path and open doors for me. And I really got to a point where I focused on building a skill set so that I could, because the path that I thought I laid out for myself didn't work. And so I was like, well, I'll build a skill set that is transferable so that when something comes along that I just really want, I can go after it full force. And that's really how I ended up here. I left policy, and I was legislative director for the minority leader. I was on the governor's transition team doing transportation policy. So, the path actually led me there. And I met the lieutenant governor in that time, and I was recommended to him for his staff, and he interviewed me, and he wanted me to be his legislative director. And I was like, well, I'd only consider this if I wanted to be chief of staff, right? Like, you say the bold thing, because sometimes people don't consider you until you make that known. And I liked my job, and so I felt free to kind of say like the boldest version of what I wanted, and then he hired me for it. And I got lots of opportunities in the executive office. I led a couple special projects for Governor Whitmer, and ended up moving over to her staff as her senior advisor, which again, you and I got to work together, Becky, on economic development policy for the state. And we really, I think, did great work. And it led to some wins for Michigan in the manufacturing space. And then, the Democrats won the trifecta for the first time in 40 years. And for anyone who had worked in the super minority, this was a dream job to come back to the legislature and finally be able to do the work that you had fought so hard for. And I don't think that's a partisan statement. I think if you asked any staffer who's ever worked in the minority, would you come back for the majority, they'd strongly consider it. And so the speaker, I'd worked with him again on the economic development stuff and knew his work ethic. And he was someone that I really like. My politics aligned with his, and I thought we'd make, I actually, you heard this yesterday for those who listened to the Athena event. I actually turned the job down because I was afraid, and I turned it down several times, but really, again, got encouragement from my mentors to like take this bold step and do the job that lots of people would, lots of people want to do, but other people have not had the courage to take. And so that's a long version, but yeah, that's how I ended up here.
No, I think that perfectly illustrates something that I think I've been told throughout my career is if it doesn't scare you, it's not worth it. So if that next step is not something that gives you a little bit of pause and makes you wonder how you're going to fake it till you make it or get in there and get your hands dirty, then is it really worth the time to try and invest in making it yours? So I love that. And yeah, you have an amazing journey and you've done a great job with Speaker Tate. So very glad to have you here. Tiffany, so you own and manage a marketing agency and just acquired a new one, right? As you just announced. You also took over a magazine when many said print was dead and so many people were moving to digital. So what was one thing or maybe a few things that ultimately made you take the leap and branch out to start M3 Group and then take on 517 Business and Life?
Well, I was frankly a reluctant business owner at the very beginning. So I didn't really have a dream to run a business. I have a journalism degree and I was a reporter for a few years and I was an editor and I really love the written word. So over the course of, many positions that I had, it just seemed like something was pushing me in the direction of running my own thing. I'm a risk taker by nature and I'm extremely nosy. So I want to know everything. I want to get things done. And so I started the agency 22 years ago and it was just a couple of us. And, one of these things where you don't really know what you are getting yourself into. One of the things that I was super concerned about is, all the things that I really didn't have a passion for. So I have a passion for the work, right? Marketing, helping people, achieve their goals, grow their businesses. Those are things that are really meaningful to me. Working in the accounting area and doing, some of the HR practices and all of those other things, facilities, all of the things that you have to do when you're first running a business wasn't so appealing. But I really felt like, I could challenge myself. And as I said, I love to take risks and I love to move things forward. So over the course of those years, the dream sort of changes and shifts. As it relates to the magazine, with my journalism degree, I really just felt like I needed to be able to harness some of that energy. And in the PR space, I was constantly working to get good news covered. And it is so challenging to get good things out there in the media. So finally, I just kind of tossed my hands up in the air and said, I can do this myself. I can make this happen. And so I started a women's magazine first and had that for several years. And then I did purchase the Greater Lansing Business Monthly, the only business publication here in the Lansing region. And so it was definitely one of those things where a lot of naysayers, people telling you not to do it. It's not the right time. It's not going to go well. Honestly, it's been amazing. And one of the things that I would say for me is I just don't listen to all of the negativity. So I do take in all of the information, but I process through it and I'm a really hard worker. So I just knew that I would do whatever I had to do to make it work. And then what's the worst thing that would happen if it didn't? Right? I just would stop doing it. And so when you start processing the world that way, it's a lot easier to have the courage to make decisions, to move forward or to take those risks. So for me, it's just been an amazing journey of trying new things, adding, things here. And I've let go of things that haven't worked. Fortunately, I still have a magazine and it's fun to still work on. And I think that the region appreciates that it's still here. So I love it.
I know that a few times Jim Holcomb, our CEO, has set the magazine on my desk and said, you need to read this article or check this out. So good work there.
Well, thank you.
So you both have had very different career paths and, trajectories there. And as you've progressed, I guess, what would you say your biggest hurdle has been or hurdles have been? And then maybe conversely, what key factors helped you get where you are today?
I don't know. The biggest hurdle, I think, for me was, no one's path is exactly like yours. And figuring out, what's the right next move, or is this going to help me or hurt me, or when is it the right time to leave? Because you don't want to, sometimes in this business, if you stay with a member or an elected official too long, you kind of miss that window to leave. And so like the figuring out like all the people that naysay you, right? Like I had people when I've taken positions, they've told me, oh, that's a lateral move, or, well, what does that job really mean? I had someone when I went over to be the chief of staff to the lieutenant governor, I asked a few friends for advice, right? And I had one person say, well, what does a lieutenant governor even do? I had more than one person say that to me, right? But sometimes what you have to understand is everybody doesn't have your vision. Everyone can't see what you can do. And you have to map out you got to go into things with a plan or whatever your way of doing things. And I really looked at it as an opportunity to like carve out a space for a lieutenant governor that maybe didn't exist. I had a friend in national media that said to me after the lieutenant governor had done some national media that I carved out a space for him, and other lieutenant governors across this country were able to stand in that space. One of them being John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, another one being Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin, who both ended up running for U.S. Senate. One of them successful, one not successful, but Mandela Barnes is still very, very relevant in Democratic politics. And I had not thought about that, but you bring yourself and your skill set to these jobs, and you have an opportunity to carve out a space that maybe someone that did the job before didn't do it the way you did, but because of who you are and the skill set that you bring, it brings a different turn to things. The job that when I left the lieutenant governor and went over to the governor's office, they created that role for me. That role didn't exist, and it doesn't exist in the same way now. There are people with that title, but they do a different job. So I think a lot of times we think about these hurdles, and the key factor I think for me that helped me really was building my confidence. We talked a lot about imposter syndrome yesterday, and really realizing that you bring value and that you have a skill set that makes this thing marketable, or makes this acquisition or this employee or this position or this project different, even though other people have tried it before, right? How many legislative things have we done that people have told us, well, you'll never get that passed. We've tried, right? But then because of the people involved and the team you put together and the coalition you build, you're able to get something done that everyone else said was impossible. So I think sometimes those hurdles can teach you how, when you face bigger hurdles, to get over them, because you can rely on the experience that you had from previous tough times.
Yeah, I would echo that, right? I mean, it's sometimes so difficult to, process your perspective in the lens of how everyone else can view it. I would agree. I think one of the other hurdles that I really faced was starting my business 22 years ago, and just, you have to put so much time and so much effort into it. It certainly isn't an 8-hour-a-day situation. I remember times when my husband would call me at about 10 o'clock, and I just was so, into my work that he's like, "Are you coming home? Are you coming here?" Yes. I just totally lost track of time. And so I think it's, that whole work-life myth that, it really doesn't exist. But when I was raising a family and trying to, build the business, I think that was a huge hurdle that I had to work through, where, going to games and missing certain things that needed, to happen. I think there's a huge myth that, when you own your own business, you can do whatever you want, and you can, you don't have anyone telling you what to do. Well, the honest truth is that you have clients that are telling you what to do. You need to make sure that you are there for them, and that you're consistently looking at what's happening in your business. The other thing I would say is, at that time, there was a lot of difficulty with, I was, a woman-run business, and, working with, men who were running other companies. There was, it was not always the easiest. And I really worked hard to, sit at the table with all of those men and really just make sure that they understood that I had every right to be there and I could do the job as well as anyone. And so those are things that I think, that were challenging at the time, but over the years, it gets a lot easier to maintain.
Well, and something I think that we talked about on our last Athena event was something you said, Shaquila, that you belong at 100% of the tables that you're sitting at.
Absolutely.
And I think that you just illustrated that beautifully. I think we've all, at some point, been the only female voice at a table, and how you navigate that and make sure that your voice is heard takes a lot of courage.
Yes. Especially when oftentimes it feels like they're patting you on the head, like, that's cute, but we know better than you. But you bring your experience, right? You know your audience, you know the people that you're trying to reach. I mean, in your case, Tiffany, and who can better express that than you?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
Well, and I think something else I've heard in both of your sentiments is some semblance of either negative self-talk or a vision of what it should look like, and wrestling with that versus what maybe work-life balance actually is, and that sometimes there is no balance, and you have to be okay with that, knowing that sometimes there will be balance, and that's life, because life is imperfectly perfect, right?
Very true.
So question, I guess, best advice for women who may be considering a bold change, a bold move, career change, possibly something you wished you had said to your younger self as you were sort of going through some of these challenges. Tiffany, do you want to start?
Sure. So advice, I think that, one of the things I like to do, and comes from my reporter days, is I like to gather a lot of information. So if I am deciding on making a big move or a huge decision that, could be difficult, I gather the information and I really process through it. I mentioned earlier that I'm a risk taker, so I'm always going to lean into, doing the big thing. And so I would recommend that you make your own decision and you don't listen to everyone who's telling you that it's not a good time or it's not something that you should do. I really believe that, it's up to you and your willingness to lean into the issue.
That's excellent advice.
Great advice. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Like, when you're making this plan for this bold move, even if everything doesn't line up perfectly, it will work out. And I think for me, a lot of times I stopped myself from doing things because it wasn't perfect. It wasn't exactly how I wanted it. And what I've learned is sometimes you just run through the tape, or it's even better on the other side, but you got to get to the other side. Also, don't be overwhelmed by all of the steps, right? It really is, how do you eat a whale one bite at a time? It really is like, if you take that first step, the second step becomes easier and the third step. So it's those two things. Like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, and don't be overwhelmed by the journey. Like, enjoy it, rest in it, and take it step by step.
Putting courage into action, right?
Yes.
Excellent. So we just covered a lot, and we're coming up on time here. So I want to give each of you an opportunity for just one takeaway. Is there something that we didn't cover in our conversation, or something that you think each of our listeners, who are female business leaders and men too, across the state, that maybe they should know before we wrap up?
There's another piece of advice that I carry from a friend of mine who told me, ask for everything you want. Like when you're going into a proposal or you're going into a job, let them know that you're happy to be here, you're willing to do the work, but also sometimes ask for the thing that you think might be impossible, because that there might be a counter. You might get everything you want, right? Like, I think we, especially women, we're afraid. We're taught to be, grateful with the salary that they offer us, or grateful to just be invited to be at the table. But sometimes, again, you bring a value, or you bring an experience that no one else has. So ask And if they say no, you didn't lose anything.
Absolutely.
I totally agree with that. That's awesome. I would say be your authentic self. You know, a lot of times we are encouraged to be something that we're not, or told that we shouldn't, you know, do our hair a certain way, or we should make, you know, some sort of compromise in who we are. And I think that no matter who you are, you're wonderful, and it's you who are going to make whatever that dream is happen, whether it's in business or in your work or whatever it is. And I just think that it's one of those things that not everyone does, and I really believe that it just makes you so much happier in the end if you are authentic.
I feel like you must have looked up the enlightened principles of Athena, because being your authentic self is one of them, and it directly ties into courage, because there is so much courage behind owning who you are or what you want to be and taking that risk. So well said, ladies. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, we are at time. I so appreciate our conversation. This has been great, and just another, great conversation as it relates to courage and what that looks like for our leaders across the state. Would also love to just note that we have more of these conversations available through our Michigan Athena membership, and you can learn more about those resources, our online community, our directory, newsletter, book club, all of that at michamber.com/miathena. Thank you both.